Hi, I'm Kristen Hubert, and today I'm going to be talking about how I manage my scraps, specifically scraps for making quilts, because that's what I'm into at the moment. And the video kind of came about because I was cutting for a scrap quilt, a specific pattern, somebody else's that I'm going to do, and cutting's not my favorite thing. So I found myself just kind of noticing what I was doing, and that I wasn't just cutting for one quilt, I was kind of cutting for loads of other ones. So I thought I would just share it in case it's useful, because I know that some people, some other quilters that I know say they don't quilt as much with scraps as they wish they could because they don't know how to organize it and it's just all too much, so they just throw it in the scrap bin. So basically, I usually don't sew from patterns, or at least not full quilt patterns, where you have to cut loads and loads at once. If I'm gonna do like a pattern quilt, I'd rather do like a sampler, like a block, foundation piece, something like that, where I can cut and then sew and cut and sew. That's kind of, I mean, nobody likes cutting, do they? I don't know, maybe you do. But I attended Quilt Con Together last year. So that was the Quilt Con conference, Modern Quilt Guild's annual conference, but they did it online last year because obviously COVID. And I'm in the UK, so I've never been to the real one, and it's unlikely I'm going to go anytime soon. So I attended and listened to a few lectures and a few classes, and one of them was by Blair Stockner of Wisecraft, and she was talking about color value in scrap quilts, which I was quite interested in because generally I'm quite a monochromatic or kind of color themed scrap quilter. So I'm not the kind that puts like loads of crazy colors together. So, but she was talking about how you could do that and still have it look more harmonious because you're using sort of light and medium and dark. Anyway, I was interested in learning more about that, and she was showing us some of her quilts and some of her patterns. So I went on after that lecture and bought one of her patterns. It was the Rojas pattern, and I'll put a picture of it up here somewhere, and I'm sure I'll put the link in the description. But then when I got the PDF and read it and saw how many bits you had to cut of each size, I was like, oh, don't know. So I think I started cutting a bit and then I just lost the heart. And then recently I was like, no, I bought that. I'm not allowed to buy another pattern until I've done that one. So I started cutting up some of my scraps, and I decided I needed to organize it into a particular system. And what I ended up doing was cutting pieces for lots of different quilts. So for the Rojas one, you need I wanted to make a queen size one. So you need 320 pieces of various different sizes of these scraps. And even if you're cutting it from scrap, especially if you're cutting it from scraps, and there's almost more cutting to do, because you're not necessarily cutting from a great big folded piece of fabric. Anyway, so I ended up putting the different sizes. So some of them are strips, and there's strips in different color values. So I've got various boxes of the strips and various bags of the different squares for it as well. So what I did was put, so the way she's divided it for this one is light, medium, dark. So I would put light and the size, and then I would put how many I needed. So I put need 320, and then as I'm cutting and putting stuff in, I was putting however many, 100, 150, and just adding it to every time, so I didn't lose track and I didn't have to keep counting them and whatever. So, and I think in general, if you know you're planning a quilt in the future, then you could be writing down the different sizes for all the different ones and have these bags or boxes or however you want to do it. But while I was doing this one, I was getting so fed up with the cutting. I think I've been cutting for 3 evenings in a row, and I'm almost done, but I'm not quite done yet. Anyway, never again. But so as I was cutting though, I was coming up with similar size offcuts, I guess, because of the sizes that I needed. So a lot of them look like strips, right? And I had bought, if you see my video, I had an eBay haul of fabric strips. So I already had some strips, and I was like, I'm getting more from cutting all this stuff. Maybe I should do a strip quilt. So I've now, as well as having the bags of stuff for the Rojas quilt, I've now got this huge container that used to be for wrapping paper, full of strips, and they're all divided by color. So I haven't decided exactly what I'm going to do with it, but that's going to be sort of the quilt after that one. And then I still ended up with, so that's 2. And 3, I still ended up with other bits and scraps. And so what I do with these is divide it into a few things. So 1, I look and see, could I cut a hexagon out of it? Because I'm currently working on an English paper piecing hexie quilt. So this is all my pink ones. And I've got a similar row of blue going. And as I get more colors, I'm going to do some sort of a rainbow thing. I've never done a full hexie quilt before, so this is something I'm working on. But it doesn't have to be hexie. So you could decide you want to, some people like to do those, you know, postage stamp quilts, or so sometimes it's like 1 inch or 2 inch squares or whatever. Or the one I would do in my head that I'm going to do after this is like a clamshell one. So if you just have some size in mind that you're cutting, and you don't even have to be putting it together already, so you could just be building up the size so that when you're done the one you've done, you don't have to spend any time cutting. You've got them already there for your next quilt. And so then once I've done, so I've gotten all the ones I could get hexies out of, the rest I can't do. So then I've got the funny size scraps, right? So I've been doing a couple things with that. One is crumb quilting. So I've got a video about that as well. I've been doing a lot of the neutral crumb quilting and like just adding the odd color in. There's no color in this one yet. And then sometimes doing kind of funkier ones, but they'll probably end up in quilts with a lot of white in the background because, as I said, I'm not a super crazy quilter. But anyway, if I have a lot of the same one, then I make my own fabric. I've got another video on that as well, which you might have seen. So I'll link to all of that. And then the other one that I've been working on for a while too is my own pattern, which I'm not quite finished with yet, so you can't get it yet, but and it's probably going to be a free pattern on my website as well, is these blocks. So I've got, here's 2 examples of them here. So the scraps in the middle, those are what I'm calling kind of scrappy strips. I haven't done a video on it yet, but I will do. And so they can be just really thin pieces, but I bunch these random scraps into color groups. So not necessarily all yellow, because obviously that's got yellow and pink and green, but like it's kind of, oh, I'm going to make a block like that. Or, ooh, I've got a lot of these teal trimmings and that kind of goes with this one. So, and I make a little container for that. And then I can go and sew these strips and then eventually sew the blocks. So I will do videos on how to do this, but point being, I've got sort of different projects for different sizes of the scraps. And then the last thing, so anything else, offcuts from all of that, they all go into like a laundry bin in my room, sewing room. And those scraps, so that's like the trimmings, the tiny bits that you can't really get a seam into, they either become stuffing for something like a footstool or floor cushion or something, or sometimes I use some of those to make my scrappy bookmarks. I've got a video about that as well. So it just depends. But and they pack down loads. Like I've not had to empty that laundry bin fully, and I've been in over a year, I think. So I'm obviously using the bigger bits, I guess. But so that's the system that I've been working with. And I'm hoping, obviously I'm in the middle of all of these quilts, but eventually they're all going to come to fruition, and then I'm going to mix it up. So because I'm not the kind of quilter who's going to always cut into certain sizes necessarily, like obviously Hexies, lots of people do that. Maybe I would keep doing that, don't know. But once I've done with this batch of quilts, then this system's going to change. It'll be roughly the same system, but the sizes that I'm cutting them into are going to change. I'm not going to be always cutting them into 2.5-inch squares or 5-inch strips, or which you sometimes hear people who talk about managing scraps or sewing with scraps. They talk about set sizes that they always cut. And for me, when I'm not, so for my larger pieces, because I do have larger pieces of fabric that are stored on my dresser, which you might have seen in my sewing room organization video, they're kept like as large as they can be until I know what I want to cut them with. So the only reason I'm cutting any of this is because I've got that Rojas quilt that I want to get on with. Otherwise, I wouldn't be cutting into, you know, my 1/2 fat quarter or the bolt ends I bought or something. I don't immediately get those pieces and subdivide them and subcut them, because then that kind of, for me, that limits the possibilities of what you could make with them. So I only really want to cut into something when I have a purpose, but then there's leftovers, and sometimes those leftovers are not really big enough that you've got a whole lot of options. And that's when they're really, really scraps. And that's when I'm like, okay, that's a strip, that's a hexie, that's going to go in a scrappy strip like for these, or I've got a whole bunch and it's going to be fabric. So that's, anyway. So that's the system that I'm using. I'm sure it will change, and I'm sure I'll do other videos about it. But I thought it might be interested for some of you. And if you like videos like this, please do tune in again, subscribe, hit the bell for notifications, and leave me a comment and let me know how you deal with your scraps. If you've got a different management system, a different way that you do it. I'm always looking for tips and ideas. I've definitely not completely honed my system, so I'd be totally interested to hear what you're doing. Okay, speak to you again soon.